Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Daili. I'm going to first acknowledge the land that we're currently on. As an Indigenous sister, I am always acknowledging the space that I hold and where I go and where I come from. And currently, right now, we are in the space of the Creek Nation, here also known as Tulsa, Oklahoma. So the ancestors this is the land that they have accessed from, our ancestors back in history. So I do want to acknowledge that and thank you for this space and the time of being able to be here and share where I come from and our culture and what we have done within our coalition, also known as the Navajo Breastfeeding Coalition. So yat she Daili lister yenishya kis ani spider nishle tatnis ani bashishi kis ani parrot dashiche tabahe dashanale. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daili Lister. I am from the Hopi and Navajo tribes in Arizona, northern Arizona. I am of the Hopi tribe. I am Spider Clan maternally. Both cultures follow our maternal bloodline. So my first clan is Spider. Of the Navajo clan, I am Tangle Clan, as well as Edgewater. So this is how we acknowledge ourselves in our indigenous communities in different cultures. Some have specific clans that are more animal predominantly known. Others have, various different ways that they acknowledge themselves. And so this is how I introduce myself when I go into spaces, not only within my own indigenous community, but other communities across the states and across Turtle Island. Okay? But thank you for having me here today. I am here on behalf of my supervisor, who is the co-founder of the Navajo Breastfeeding Coalition. She couldn't be here today as she has some other engagements. She's a pretty busy woman, so I actually want to acknowledge the work that she does and how much effort and just spirit and pride that she has in doing this work. And thank you to her for trusting me to come here and share with you all the work that we do. So this is just a disclosure that we have no financial interest or relationships to disclose. So the Navajo Nation Breastfeeding Coalition was founded in 2008. It was originally started out with working side by side with the Fort Defiance Breastfeeding Task Force, which still exists on the Navajo Nation. Navajo Nation is a very big indigenous community. It consists and overlaps over 3 states. A lot of times we refer to it as big as the state of West Virginia. So it's pretty big. Population, it says 350,000. However, that population has probably since either inclined or declined with the pandemic. We have a wide range of individuals that work within our coalition. We have breastfeeding advocates. We have indigenous birth workers from the community. And we also work and partner with WIC and other hospital entities that we have. Our mission is to improve the nutritional status and overall health of families on the Navajo Nation. So recently, and again, as we continue our services across our land and our Navajo community, we continue to grow our sisters, aunties, grandmothers, elders that we work with and include. This picture here is from our recent healing retreat that we had in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this is a picture of various sisters, aunties that we share our space with. You'll see Kim Moore-Salas, who is a very well-known IBCLC Indigenous breastfeeding counselor, who is Dene, Navajo, and serves within the California region currently, but still comes home and serves a lot of our community families virtually and also in person. And then you'll see there is a wide range of our other sisters who specialize in doula work, lactation, and other various services across our Navajo Nation. So some of the work that we do is basically normalizing human milk as a first sacred food. So within our culture and dating back to our history, we've known and we know that breast milk has always been a first food for our children. So we want to continue to normalize that within our communities that we serve, whether it be rural or urban. We're also reintroducing cultural birth workers on the Navajo Nation. So throughout colonization and so forth, we've lost a lot of our cultural roots and teachings. And so now with all the things that are happening and across Turtle Island, we want to be able to preserve that and, of course, bring it back to our people and the work that we do. So we are revitalizing and preserving our culture through prenatal, birth, postpartum, and feeding practices. We do various community outreach and education across the community, both rural and urban. We partner with communities, professionals, and politicians. Within Navajo Nation, we are our own sovereign nation, and so we, have our own political governmental layout. We also promote and increase public policies that support cultural birth work. Some of our objectives here within our coalition: build and strengthen relationships between community members, community agencies, professional associations, and governmental entities supporting birth work. We promote and increase public acceptance of the benefits of breastfeeding and traditional birth work, and to promote behavioral changes that result in increased rates of breastfeeding initiation, duration, and reduced maternal and infant mortality rates. We also promote and increase acceptance and support for breastfeeding in schools and work sites. Educate healthcare providers about cultural breastfeeding, birth work, and its benefits toward decreasing maternal and infant mortality rates. Educating Indigenous birthing families about informed choices or consent. Promote health equity by bringing awareness to the effects of historical trauma on the health of the Navajo Diné families, and to promote healing. From what I've heard so far in a lot of the presentations, we all, I think, share a lot of these similarities and objectives. And I'm just so grateful to be able to, again, share this space, and hearing what from the presenters before me have shared and included, and just meeting some of you here today has been, I can't explain it. Words, I just feel like I always learn something new, or I meet somebody new, and it's just so great to see the increased popularity and work that's being done, because it needs to be there. So in regards to policy and advocacy, so our coalition, like I said, started back in 2008, and it all started because of the Navajo Nation Health Start Act of 2008. So many of you also have some policy similar to this within your states as well, or within your communities. And so this was a policy that was a first for tribal, for any tribal entity within the states in regards to breastfeeding regulation. So it was passed back in 2008. Some things to just be aware of. So talking about our governmental layout and how it works, we have 97 chapter houses across our Navajo Nation land. These communities are consisted of chapter houses. Navajo communities pass local resolutions to show community support. So how our chapter houses work are similar to what many of you might know as like city halls within your communities. So within, across Navajo Nation, we have 97 of them that are used to allocate for services or needs within those specific communities. Because it's so big, they all have their own specific needs, like many of you have shared today. We do a lot of collaborative work. So we do a lot of collaborative work with other community members. We do collaborative work with healthcare providers, the Navajo tribal government, Navajo WIC. So a lot of you are familiar with WIC. So we also have our own WIC that also has its own policies and things in place, aside from state or tribal WIC is what some are also known as. We also work with the CDC and the Arizona Breastfeeding Coalition within our efforts for policy and advocacy work. We've had funding from the Centers for Disease Control. The Navajo Breastfeeding Coalition provides employer and employee support. So because back in 2008, it was my supervisor and maybe a couple of others. We have now grown to have a advisory council board. Myself and then 3 others are also currently employed under the Navajo Breastfeeding Coalition. So it is slowly expanding because of the need and how much work that we are doing within the community, which is a great thing to see. We also work with the Navajo Area Indian Healthcare Services in efforts for their baby-friendly hospital initiation. So this started back, again, years ago. You'll see a couple of pictures. So the top picture is actually my supervisor in the middle. This was taken the day that the Navajo Nation Health Start Act of 2008 was signed. And so those are the 2 other individuals that helped to advocate and get this policy in place. The bottom picture is actually a group photo of those involved in order to create, many know them as IHS's, Indian Health Services, or Indian medical centers that are on most local reservations. And so we saw a lot of need that needed to happen in order to be able to support families that are receiving care and services there. So there was initiation that had created the move to be able to make our IHS facilities baby-friendly hospitals. And so many of you are familiar with this practice and what it entails. And so what happened was, of course, there was training, support, and advocacy in order to get this to happen. The Navajo Area IHS is a baby-friendly hospital initiative, and it was influenced to actually start this across other IHS facilities, not only in the state of Arizona, but other states as well. And so we are happy about the work that we've done up to this point in being able to create that positive change within our own facilities. So within our coalition, just like what the presenter before me had mentioned, there's always opportunity for research. I know there was another presenter that also talked about the importance of research and the need for it. And like she said, anybody can do it. You don't have to have a degree or anything like that. It creates a lot of opportunities for funding and being able to make that change that we see that our community needs. So this was a research opportunity that came up back in November of 2009, and it started because of the young lady on the left side. My supervisor's there in the middle, as well as her companion that has been with her throughout, the whole change of this process. So what had started this research project was, her name is Anne. So she came across, she worked with traveling nurses. So if you're familiar with traveling nurses, they can travel all over the states, and they do various type of care. But what she found out from these traveling nurses was that whenever they went to any of the Native American or the Indian Health Service centers, the traveling nurses mentioned to them that those facilities never provided any type of formula packaging. So babies that were born in these facilities, they weren't given like what you see in a lot of hospitals in city settings with the liquid form or formula packages and so forth. They didn't have those there. So Anne was curious to find out why, other facilities were giving formula packages, but our urban or our rural IHS facilities were not. You would think, they're in a rural setting, they don't have the resources to be able to, possibly breastfeed, or they don't have, pumps, things like that. And so she started this research project and setting, a course for the rest of the nation, essentially, to end the usage of, formula packages being given to new families that are, in the hospital setting, okay? And then Latch, the Breastfeeding Project, University of Utah. This was a project that happened in correlation with the International Lactation Consultant Association. And this was just an opportunity that was given in working closely with the maternal and child health. So again, we see the consistent need of research and support and information that is needed across, all different communities. We look at the health mortality rates amongst maternal and child health. So this was another research project that was given the opportunity to do this. Direct support services. So within our coalition, I've mentioned and given you kind of the history of where it came from, how it began, different types of things. So here we have direct support services. So in 2018 is when we started to roll out. So in the beginning, it started out a lot with advocacy support and so forth. So in 2018 is when we started rolling out direct service support. And this included in-person, in-home, or virtual community lactation support. And where we're from, just to kind of paint you a little picture, within our rural communities, it can be anywhere from 30 minutes to 2.5 hours to the nearest hospital, clinic, whatever, grocery store. And so a lot of this support was very needed across, our Navajo Nation. Community lactation support circles were created for in-person and virtual. So a lot of that happened during the pandemic in order to be able to provide those services to these communities. However, in doing that, we also reached another barrier of internet and electronics and so forth. Because we're so rural, we don't have access a lot of the times to internet service and so forth. So a lot of this, we really had to think outside the box and figure out, okay, how can we reach these families? How can we continue to support them during this time of need? So a little bit about how we've kind of developed into what we're doing now. We started an electronic breast pump program, which from funding from Rose with seed money, we were able to begin this program. And this all started pretty much when the pandemic started. We were able to access funding to be able to start this program so that we can provide pumps to moms in these rural areas. And so why we developed this was because it was difficult for the families to get pumps from even their local WIC or their WIC providers. Because again, during the pandemic, everything was shut down. And so we needed to find a way of how we could support a lot of these individuals. Trying to go through Access or through IHS services, again, these services weren't provided, so we really had to think outside the box. WIC offices were closed and so forth, so we saw an opportunity when we got this funding to be able to start this within our nation. So since then, we have received funding support from the Arizona Department of Health Services, the Brindle Foundation, New Mexico Breastfeeding Task Force, and the First Nations Development Institute to sustain the program. And yeah, it's been a challenge. And we're still continuing to face some of those challenges because there's such a high need. And with our WIC offices, we still get some pushback from them as well. So we're still trying to process a lot of these challenges, but we're finding ways that we can continue to support them. So really filling the gap and making it accessible for electric pumps across all of our rural families on Navajo Nation. So we also support in doula services as well. We started talking about that, some of you in your presentations, and seeing some of this. So under the Navajo Breastfeeding Coalition, we have what's known as the Diné Doula Collective. And we are a full circle doula support collective that is providing services prenatally, lactation education, preparation for birth, labor and delivery support, postpartum support for up to a year, and then postpartum lactation support for also a year as well. We are revitalizing our Navajo culture and practices in pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and lactation. So you guys talked a lot about being able to, within your research, see exactly what culture, what that community needs specifically, right? And implementing what you feel is needed based off of not only what you know when you were raised, or maybe what they went through, what their culture, what their beliefs are. And so a lot of this, like I mentioned in the beginning, was lost during colonization. And so we are consistently working to revitalize our culture back into these practices. In the picture that you see here, this is actually being done in one of the direct services. This was in a birth that my supervisor attended. And there you can see the little red kind of strings that are hanging. And I'll show you in another slide, actually in the next slide. It's called a sash belt within our culture. So the sash belt holds a lot of indigenous cultural teachings, beginning from when our young women come into womanhood. And it's in a ceremony called a kinauta. So our kinauta ceremony is basically done in order to, bring her into that setting, and, have those teachings taught to her. At this point is when she's actually given this sash belt for the very first time. And it serves a lot of purposes, not only within the kinauta ceremony, but also when she comes into that childbearing age and being able to do a lot of that. So here we use it in the birthing process. Some of you may see them in hospitals where they will have the bearing bars, right? And they're, trying to bear down and they hold on to the bars. So this serves in the same purpose. And a lot of times, so back from our ancestors, they were giving birth in our hogans, our traditional homes. And so this was one of those tools that was used in that birthing time. So now we are trying to, again, revitalize and reintroduce the importance of some of these tools that, again, were taken from us in at various times in our history. And then it's also used postpartumly. So after mom has baby, it is then used as what many of you may know as a rebozo, or, a postpartum belt. That sash belt is then used to help then, heal her in that postpartum period. So again, it starts from when she comes into that womanhood ceremony all the way up to even her having her own children. So talking more about our Navajo culture and breastfeeding education, we currently have a material project that is happening. Here on the screen, you'll see a handout. So again, we're trying to revitalize a lot of our culture and keep that piece going. We have wanted to create what, and many of you may have experienced this even within your own communities. You want to have people feel like they can connect, not only with, who they're working with, but also the material that you give them, right? And so within our own, what I see and what many have seen is that we don't see a lot of us on teaching material. We don't see a lot of what we know or what we understand on teaching material. So within this project, this is just a sample. It's not live yet or anything, so please don't take any pictures or do any of that. Thank you. So this is the Navajo breastfeeding her child is very valuable. So as you can see on here, we do depict it, someone who looks like us or has some of the similarities or things that we can relate to. You have the English on top, and then right below it is actually the Navajo translation in our language. Again, through colonization, boarding schools, things like that, we lost a lot of our culture and our teachings, including our language. So currently, we are trying to also revitalize that within our work that we do for lactation and birth work. You see there the sash belt, so that's kind of what a sash belt looks like, long and, very similar. They're usually red in color. And this particular handout is focusing on skin to skin and the importance of colostrum. So if you actually read the English version of it, a lot of it you probably have read or seen elsewhere. But again, below it is the Navajo translation that you see. And within our communities, we have a lot of multi-generational homes, meaning you have the grandparents, great-grandparents, aunties, all living within the home. And so we also want to be able to include and bring in those individuals to help support the mom, the family that is having the child. And so that's also some of that we're seeing. So again, we're doing this to meet the demand of the Navajo families to create Navajo-specific and culturally sensitive lactation and education material. We will have things that will include pamphlets, posters. The posters will be, the posters will be hung in our IHS facilities across the Navajo Nation, our WIC offices, and other clinics that are on our facilities. Some of the brochures will include lactation tips, positioning and latch, stomach sizes, how much baby can eat, feeding cues, and so forth. And again, this is where the locations that these will be distributed to. We also are going to trying to receive funding to be able to create PSA pieces that will essentially be just what you see here. It'll be the English version and then in Navajo. Again, we're in a rural area where we don't have much. However, what we do have a lot of times is radio and so forth. Even my grandpa, even from the time of his passing, he would just always listen to the radio. Basketball games, we have the Phoenix Suns back in Arizona. He listened to every game and he could just, listen and envision it. He didn't need a TV. He was like, Suns are playing, turn on the radio, and he would just listen. So a lot of how we communicate within our community is through the radio. And so that's what we want to continue to do for the Navajo Nation. Partners in this were the Sakidillia Language Immersion Prenatal and Children Child Care Program. They have their own services as well, so we've partnered with them in order to create these material, and as well as the First Nations Development Institute. We have our project leads, which is part of our team. We have the Navajo Breastfeeding Coalition's Culture Advisor and Indigenous Doula, Mariah Holiday. She has done a lot of great work and has been doing such good stuff with putting this all together. We have the medicine people, so we have medicine men and women who have also put their input in so that we make sure that we get it right? We want to make sure that we're making it inclusive to everybody. Our Navajo translators, my supervisor, the executive director, and then that of our members from the advisory council. And then the artist that has been doing our work is Lynn Hardy. So she is also Indigenous. So within this project, we're also trying to sustain the businesses that we already have established within our communities. So making sure that those small businesses and those that are within our Indigenous community are also benefiting in some way and giving back. So Lynn Hardy has been the one who's been doing a lot of our work. So potential overall outcomes. So what we hope to see is basically healing from generational trauma. And we are continuing to do this in various ways, normalizing and revitalizing that human milk is a gift to the Navajo people. From the holy ones, that returning to Navajo cultural birth practices opens the spiritual gates to healing for future generations. So within our culture, we say that baby is precious, that they live and come from another spirit world. So once they're here, they hold a lot of power and a lot of just positivity. So, and then mental and physical healing through traditional healing ceremonies, such as the Navajo birth ceremony. So when we have a mom who wants to have a birth ceremony, she goes through this whole healing process in order to be able to have a healthy birth outcome, right? So some of you may refer to this as like a perinatal support, where she's trying to prepare herself, or prenatal support. We have sweat lodges, we have the enemy way ceremony, and the proper processing of healing. Most medicine people encourage communities to have their children identify with their tribe. This will allow young minds to know who they are, where they come from, and the Navajo birth ceremony and the baby's first food, human milk, begins that process. The opportunity to use ceremony as a way of life to retain balance, meeting the needs of lactating employees, parents by optimizing support in community settings, hospitals, and businesses, and understanding that the role of cultural teachings and cultural healing practices can help navigate overall health and wellness. So trying to definitely, again, revitalize and reintroduce a lot of our cultural teachings while, again, kind of starting from the beginning, even though it's not, because, again, our ancestors did it as well. In closing, we just want to say the healing medicine of the first sacred food, known as human milk, is one of the reasons the Navajo Diné survived the long walk and other acts of genocide designed by the U.S. government to eradicate us. 3,000 of our ancestors made it home after the treaties were signed. Countless Navajo children and infants either went missing or died due to forced adoption and residential schools. The power of our ancestors' milk medicine is why the Navajo are now 400,000 strong and still going. So again, this is not the beginning, nor is it the end. It's, it's something that's going to change in a lot of ways. If you would like to know more about our coalition and what we do, or just reach out, and if you have questions, you can reach us at dinehnationbreastfeeding@gmail.com. There's my supervisor's phone number. You can also find us on Facebook under Navajo Breastfeeding Coalition. And yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I thought it was really powerful what you were saying about using traditional practices to address historical trauma, and I wonder if you could just talk more about how you talk about that with moms.
That's actually a good question, because the other thing that isn't mentioned in this presentation is that within our indigenous communities, again, due to colonization, I mentioned residential schools and so forth, a lot of our culture was lost. And so we have families who develop new teachings and new beliefs and new so forth. So, and I can say this from my own personal experience, paternally, my grandmother is a priest. So I came from a Christianity understanding background. My maternal side of my family is more traditional, where we took on a lot of those teachings from our ancestors and so forth. So I was, exposed to two different worlds. And so in doing this work, I had to identify and find out where I felt I belonged and where I felt I believe and so forth. And so in that, my family takes on our traditional culture and our teachings. So my children have gone through, my oldest daughter went through her kinota. I went through my birthing ceremony with all three of my children. All three of my children were carried and placed in cradle boards and so forth. So, but that's not everybody within my community that I serve. So I have to be mindful and respectful of what that looks like. There is a lot of individuals who can say, yeah, my family is also Christian, and that's what I believe, but I feel like I want to get back in touch with my ancestors. Teach me how. And so, we're just open with them, and we have that conversation. What does that look like to you, right? Do you believe in the cradle board? Do you think that you want to use it? And, being open and sharing my own personal experience as well. So, yeah. And I'm sure a lot of you, doulas, lactations, getting on that personal level, right? Getting to know them, making them feel comfortable. That's really what we do, even in that aspect, and listen to what they have to say.
I'm just curious, in a melting pot like America, is a platform like Ancestry.com important to the Navajo Nation? And the reason I ask is because I'm thinking that your tribes or your people are more cohesive and unified than, like, say, black people who were, we got Irish and Italian and all kinds. Is that a concern for?
That's actually also a controversial thing as well. So we have a lot of different pieces that we are also trying to overcome and take away, I guess, the normalization of it. You know, as African American people, you were subdued to slavery, right? I was having a conversation with someone in the back. You know, African American women were used as wet nurses in history, right? So I'm sure there's, again, like you said, a lot of your background can come from Irish and so forth. And within our Native American communities, we went through what is called, like, well, Navajo specifically, the Long Walk. We have the residential schools. I don't know if some of you are familiar, but with ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act, that was it was very popular, and we just found out a couple of days ago that it is sustained and it is being kept intact, which is amazing. So, but within those residential schools, that is where that Christianity was really pushed. We also found, and some of you may see or have heard of movies that are being created that talk about what happened in these residential schools. Not only were these children taught that teaching their language was wrong, but many of them were also raped, molestation that happened within these facilities. We also have, you know, within our own Indian healthcare services and within that governmental entity, we have situations where women were basically not asked, but forced and were, infertile without their consent. So we have a lot of different things. I can't tell you that I'm full-blooded, My grandfather or my grandmother, who also went through the boarding school system, may have endured or encountered some of these things as well. So my ancestry may come, I may have a little bit of Irish, I may have a little bit of Italian. But also within our communities, we deal with the issue of what we call certified Indian blood. There's no other human race that is asked to identify like how we have to. I've heard people say, dogs are looked at as far as, having to do and be identified as specific things, right? And so even that is controversial as well. There are people who probably go through what you're asking about, Ancestry.com and so forth. I've had families and friends who have asked and have done it, and they've learned that they do have some Irish or, so forth in them. But again, this all kind of goes and stems back to our history and what has happened. And the hope is that we continue to overcome that generational trauma to influence and have a better outcome for our moms and our families.